to our talk on celebrating jazz. My name is Karen McQuigg, and I'm the Alumni Engagement Director at McMaster. Joining me today to help facilitate our conversation is my good friend and colleague, Jamie Tennant. Jamie graduated McMaster in 1992 and is an accomplished author, broadcaster, and program director at our campus radio station, CFMU 93.3 on your FM dial. Jamie and I are very excited to have a conversation about all things jazz with fellow Mac grad Darcy Hepner, a graduate of the music program in 1978. A seasoned performer, accomplished composer, arranger, and respected educator, Hamilton native saxophonist Darcy Hepner has worked with such legendary figures as B.B. King, Aretha Franklin, Sergio Mendes, Henry Mancini, Tony Bennett, Mel Tormé, Artie Shaw, the Berlin Contemporary Jazz Orchestra, and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He has been on the music faculty at the New York University, the Berklee College of Music in Boston, Mohawk College in Hamilton, and is the founder of the Selkirk College music program in Nelson, BC. Most recently, Darcy has performed and recorded with the Cowboy Junkies, Grammy Award guitarist Larry Carlton, Tom Wilson's Lee Harvey Osmond, including the 2020 Juno Award-winning album Mohawk, and with Ian Thomas on his symphonic recording A Life in Song. He has conducted the National Arts Center Orchestra for Tom Wilson's Symphonic Scars. And in 2017 and 2019, he conducted the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra's Beatles Experience, which he also arranged and produced. Thanks to Jamie and Darcy for joining me today, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Hey everybody, welcome to our conversation about jazz with Darcy Hepner. How you doing, Karen? Darcy?
Great. Excited to do this.
Excellent. Well, we got a simple yet also maybe very broad question for you to start off with, and that is, this is kind of a Jazz 101 thing. So for those who don't really even understand the concepts, what is jazz and what are the origins of the music? I realize you can do a Ken Burns answer on that and go for 20 minutes, but.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there's PhD dissertations that go into all that kind of detail. What is jazz and its origins? They're almost, well, it's one and the same in a sense, is that it's well recognized that it's an American art form that came out of New Orleans, and it came from so many different cultures meeting together at that particular time, at the turn of, well, I suppose a couple of centuries ago now, around 1895, 1900. A lot of different cultures mixed together and produced what became the beginnings of jazz. And that was, it's an interesting discussion because it is really a multicultural music, and it always was that way because as, there was, it is essentially the greatest innovators, especially at the beginning, were African-American. But as they say, slaves were taken to other islands and other places, but there's no jazz there. So what made it particularly compelling was that melting pot of people in New Orleans at the time that, and of course there were brothels and bars and lots of places to have fun. And that was the music that evolved through that. So then what jazz is and how it comes out of that is it originally was a statement of the melody, and then the melody was embellished. So the jazz part of that is almost an embellishment of the melody. So you play the melody and then you play around with the melody. And then the evolution of jazz is how that playing around with the melody became an art form.
Okay. Now, so if you're listening to a piece of music, what makes it identifiable as jazz? How do I know that it's a jazz piece?
Well, there may be other musics that borrow some of these things, but one is going to be melodic embellishment. Then it's going to be improvisation. Jazz is a conversational music, so all the instruments are going to be reacting to each other. So conversation is a big part of it. And huge is the concept of rhythmic syncopation. And it's the rhythm that made the music predominantly jazz and gave it the feel that we know. And that has an evolution also, of course, like all of the elements of art do. But at the beginning, it was syncopation that was really rhythmically defining that music amongst those other things.
Okay. Now you said that it's a uniquely American art form, but what other countries sort of came together to create jazz or to influence jazz, do you think?
Well, I'm not an expert in that field, but I would say that whatever was going on in New Orleans at that time, they referred to it as Cajuns. That, although that was also considered a mispronunciation of Canadians, but French Canadians.
Right.
So there were a lot of different kinds of things going. I mean, it was just the sailors were coming in, and all of these things were melding together. But it grew up out of New Orleans, and to this day, New Orleans has its own culture that's quite musically culture, everything, but different from anywhere else. So you can see how that would have sprung up there. And of course, the river networks, it moved up the Mississippi and it got to Chicago, and the drum went off the stick onto the cymbal, and things started to change, and it was just traveling through the country and through people, different filters, as it were.
Cool.
So Darcy, in your opinion, what has been the influence and significance of jazz in our society?
Well, I only see jazz, but it is truly everywhere. I mean, it's such it's the roots of blues. It's the roots of R&B, and a lot of the harmony that came from jazz and the rhythm that came from jazz became, as it evolved as popular music, it started to branch into different directions. So rock and roll was jazz guitar players playing blues and different kinds of things. And then you see it in movies all the time, or the stereotypes of the saxophone player under the lamppost, or Bleeding Gums Murphy, or whatever. It's just so ingrained into the culture that like everything else, like so many other things. But I think I've just been doing this so long now that I just take for granted that I couldn't tell you that what it is there, but I can tell you when it's not.
Right. So why don't we go back and talk a little bit about your journey as a musician and a composer? What made you decide that this was going to be your life path?
Well, mostly accidents. My parents were both musicians. My father taught music at McMaster, and my mother was the founder of the music program at Mohawk College. And I was a cellist. And I was in love with every kind of music that came along. And what I suppose the turning point for me is my mother had a party. My parents had a party at their house, and my mom brought home records from Mohawk College library. And my job was to turn them over, because they were 15 minutes long. So I'd run around the house turning records over, and she just brought whatever was in the library. And there were two that I heard that I just kept going back. And this is very interesting. One was the Jazz Crusaders live at the Lighthouse, and the other was Oscar Peterson Canadiana Suite. And I slid those under the bed when my mom took her records back to Mohawk, and I gave them up a few months later, but I wore them out before they went back. And that was kind of the, Oscar and the Crusaders started me thinking about it. And the very first jazz record I ever bought was this one. This is John Coltrane live at Birdland. This is the record, my 25 cents. And I put it on. It's got my very young signature on it. Wow. But I put it on, and I did not understand the note I was hearing, but it intrigued me. It intrigued me very much. So I started listening to other players. I wonder if I have that one here. Well, I do. So this is the second jazz record I bought. This was another 25 cents at a church bazaar. Stanley Turrentine, a very funky tenor player, great jazz player, but came out of the blues more. And I could relate to that immediately. 6 months later, I put on Coltrane and I got it. But it took me a while to adapt to it. And I was hooked. By then I was hooked. And I felt as a cellist in an orchestra, which is what I was doing, I was playing the same fingerings, the same bowing as everybody. And I wanted to express myself as a musician. And to me, playing in a symphony felt like putting door handles on a car. It was like an assembly line, doing what everybody's doing. And I felt like I needed to express myself more directly in music, and jazz became the obvious choice for me. Not so much for my parents, they had to adjust, but they did. But for me, it was absolutely I had no choice.
Before Jamie asked the question, I just had a flashback to high school where you used to actually write your name on your albums when you took to parties and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So I had a flashback.
I don't know if you know. I don't know if you know this record. I mean, this is a later period Coltrane on himself. Yeah. And my mom was having another party and thought, well, what records would be better for a party than records from her teenage son? So she went down and took Coltrane live at Birdland to a hayride. And boy, I mean, you know, when it was hay on it the next day, I was really angry, but obviously it didn't spend too much time on their turntable, so it was all good.
It's like taking Ornette Coleman to a Presbyterian church service. People would just be very confused by the entire thing. So
yeah, well, I'm a fan of Ornette, and I actually had a chance to chat with him for a while about his music. And
nice.
I would think that he would probably do okay. You know, I think Ornette people would, you know, was very kind in expressing his thoughts about music.
Yeah.
And I think his approach to music, for the most part, was in a way much less complicated than Coltrane's.
Okay.
So I know what you mean, but
yeah. So we've been trying to get you to define jazz a little bit. Now let's take the opposite tack and ask you, why can jazz be so hard to define? Because sometimes it really is.
Well, it is, but it's the same as trying to define R&B.
Yeah.
You know, the music has evolved. So in the beginning, you could say, well, it's swinging, because the rhythmic and the syncopation was really important. So that was that, and it had a blues influence. So there was a swing, and there was a blues, and there was a joyous sound to it. You know, and through the evolution, not only in the U.S. but worldwide, different countries started to add their own nuance to it, and that's a longer evolution. So it hits Europe and the so-called ECM school, where instead of swinging, it became straight eights, and you can hear that in Keith Jarrett or Jan Gabarek or so many of the European artists that, and of course at the same time they had different roots than us. We came up with American musicians in that world came up with Duke Ellington, Count Basie. They came up with Bartók and Stravinsky. So there was going to be a different slant on how the music came out over there. And at this point, I hope I'm not jumping ahead in any questions, but pretty much in Europe, you'll find, with the exception, no, not even there, most countries have now their own take on it. There are certainly excellent purveyors of American style jazz in Europe, but there's also a free jazz that came out of that. Free jazz coming out of Ornette Coleman. But as things evolved here in North America, particularly after Ornette in the 50s, and then Coltrane, and then the Beatles, and how that shifted culture, in Europe, they didn't lose sight artistically of what Ornette had done and what free jazz had done. So they continued to evolve in those lines when we stopped. So countries like Germany, particularly Germany, have an amazingly deep free jazz culture, which is just astounding, like the level that they took it to. I was fortunate to be able to do a record with the Berlin Contemporary Jazz Orchestra, which was some of the strongest European free jazz players. Evan Parker from London, Alexander von Schlittenbach from Berlin, and these guys really specialized in that. And that was a mind-blowing experience for me to be in that band and to hear Nobeishi Ino from Japan. These guys coming up with this, Paul Lovins, the drummer, just playing these things that, you know, they've evolved in such creative ways that we've lost sight of. And so that music is really exciting. And then if you go to Scandinavia, they have their own take on it. Italy does. France has an absolute French tradition in jazz now. Austria, a European thing, you know, a lot of things that work here would not work there. They're not interested. So the music has spread out all over the world, but it has taken on the flavors, the local flavors of wherever it's gone, but it still retains improvisation as its core.
Yeah. Well, there's so many different within any genre of any kind of music. There's the subgenres, there's the little micro genres, and there's each interpretation by each and every artist adding something different. But in broader strokes, what would you say are the most important or most known subgenres of jazz? You mentioned free jazz, for example.
Okay, well, I would say Dixieland is a very well recognized swing. The swing era, which would have been in the 40s, 30s, 40s, Glenn Miller, that sort of thing. I think we would call that, that's a style. Swing is a style. Now we refer to bebop and all of that more as mainstream, sort of not traditional is wrong, because they also call Dixieland traditional. But so we could mainstream, or I think they refer to what Wynton Marsalis has done as neoclassic. So going back to the classic period, but reimagining it a little bit. We have ECM, the European label that is now actually recording also Americans, and was Keith Jarrett's label forever. We have jazz funk, we have fusion, acid jazz, Afro-Cuban jazz, and then Brazilian. Of course, the influence of Gilberto and Jobim and their harmony, what they brought to it, was also quite unique. And I think we're going to talk about smooth jazz later, but I think we can call that a style.
Sure.
We can call that a style. And smooth jazz.
So for a long time, jazz was the dominant art form, musically speaking, in North America for a spell. And if you look at the charts today, of course, you won't find any jazz there. It's actually not even a lot of guitars. Right now, R&B and hip hop is the main sort of top 40 music you're going to find around the world. Do you think that jazz would ever sort of come back as a dominant art form in terms? I mean, I doubt it'll ever go away, but could it ever become as popular as it once was?
Well, what makes that an interesting question is you have to say, well, when it was a dominant form would have been in the 40s and maybe in the 50s. And of course, we all know the legends like Charlie Parker and Miles Davis and Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins. Coleman Hawkins, 1939 and all that. So that's in that period where it was. But by the time, by the 50s and 52nd Street, that all seems like it was a popular time. But as friends of mine who were there, my former teacher Lee Konitz was there, he said, there was a lot of work on 52nd Street, but a lot of people were not working. So being a dominant art form, I think it was a popular music for a long time. When it became an art form and became recognized as what it had achieved by then, that would have probably started around the time of Charlie Parker, when it actually became an art form. And then Coltrane extended that to, he dropped a gauntlet that I think to this day, very few people have managed to even come close to. So it's not for everybody. So I don't know how popular it ever was, except when it was the popular music. And that was big bands. And the reason that big bands were probably popular is because there weren't PA systems. So you needed a whole bunch of people to make noise for the audience to hear it. So I think that popular or dominant, no, that won't happen again. However, like classical music, it will always have a place, a niche, and people will always be, it's so compelling a style, it's so interesting to get involved in, and it's all about people, and each person has a different flavor. So it's a very interesting art form, and it allows self-expression, which I think is the original artists that were coming out of this, African American, needed a place for self-expression when it couldn't happen, and this brought so much freedom to it. It just made so much sense. So I think it is an art form now, and it sits in the realm of the art music that will not have the same place in pop culture.
Okay.
So Darcy, when I reached out to you to ask you to do this, I had told you that over the holiday season, I had watched the documentary Listening to Kenny G, which was released in 2021. And it focuses on Kenny G, of course, but it also asks what makes music good or bad. Do you think that's a fair question to ask? And what's your opinion on that?
Oh, I think it's a very fair question to ask. And I would certainly love to look at Kenny's music through that lens. But let me say that for me, the basic elements of music are melody, harmony, and rhythm. And what we consider good music is essentially how those three areas are creatively put together in a compelling way. And then we add to that timbre, tone, taste, which is kind of important, and then technique and groove, time, whatever. So, but those three elements. So if I'm looking at music from a certain lens, or if I'm looking at somebody who's an artist, then I'm going to ask myself, I call it the 5 T's: taste, tone, time, technique, and touch. Touch being articulation. So then I look to balance that and see, is that somebody who has acknowledged these things and is working to improve them and has an evolution? And an artist would fit into the category of somebody who works to balance that and improve their knowledge in those areas. In the case of Kenny G, since he said it himself, for me, the musicians I know that love music, they pursue all of these things, and it's a lifetime pursuit because you want to get better at. In the Kenny G documentary, they asked Kenny what's his favorite kind of music, and his response is, I don't know if I really like music. And I think that said it all to me there. He likes his music, but that's what he can do. But Kenny is concerned about melody. He doesn't know anything about harmony. He explained that too. He has a keyboard player play until he hears the right chord. So I wouldn't say that he's an artist. I would say that he's a craftsman. Like there's not an evolution to what he's doing, but there is a craft to what he's doing.
Okay.
Well, watching that, I mean, he was certainly a lightning rod, more than I ever knew, because they had certainly academics, jazz academics talking about him and musicians and stuff. And he has, smooth jazz for many people is Kenny G. And so is that music actually jazz music, in your opinion? The jazz.
Well, it is okay. It is to me personally. Smooth jazz is not jazz, and I'll tell you, I don't disrespect it. I just don't think Kenny G's the best guy doing it. There are people like David Sanborn who have all of those things together, are truly magnificent creators and unique voices. And people say that Dave Sanborn is a smooth jazz player. Now, Dave Sanborn can play anything and be absolutely magnificent. But I will say that in the case of Kenny G and in smooth jazz, first of all, smooth jazz is what people call music that doesn't have a singer. So if you hear the melody played on an instrument, then it must be some kind of jazz. So there were people playing what Kenny was doing before Kenny started doing it, but they didn't know how to market it as such. It's some kind of jazz, but jazz scared people. But if they called it smooth jazz, they could do that. I would say that smooth jazz is really an instrumental form of pop music, not really jazz. Let's see. I think that's my thoughts on that subject. I know there was something else that's just slipped my mind.
And so based on that, like smooth jazz is everywhere, right? Like you turn it on, like I often will, flip it on when I'm having dinner, and you hear it in, the shopping mall and different places or whatever. So,
right.
How has that influenced popular culture and that makes people, if you think it's not jazz, but that's what people, general public may say, that's what jazz is, and point to that.
Yeah, that's fine. There's pluses and minuses. Kenny is at least keeping the saxophone in front of people. There's not, I can't think of another person with that kind of visibility that's saying, well, this is still a saxophone, so that's good. In terms of Kenny, what I was thinking about earlier that I'd slipped up on was Kenny, if you were to put what Kenny is doing into an older context, he's sort of the Liberace of this time. Because Liberace in his period, 50s, 60s, was considered the best classical piano player in the world in that realm. I don't think Ashkenazi or Glenn Gould was too concerned. But in the pop world, it was Liberace. And he was a pretty good piano player, but he wasn't that great. I mean, he didn't keep his, I mean, I worked with him as amongst many people, and his technique was good, was prodigious, probably younger, but he was a showman. And Kenny's kind of a showman, except I'd rather listen to Liberace. I'll be honest. I have run screaming. I have run screaming from a shopping mall because they're playing his music. So. And the reason is because Kenny does not acknowledge those elements of melody and tone in a way that has an evolution. And while he has a nice tone and he can play the saxophone, he has no real sense of improvisation unless it's very, very, he's a craftsman. Unless it's very crafted. If he plays without thinking, it sounds like somebody playing without thinking. Not somebody who's trained themselves to respond to things. And there's no conversation in his music. It's, okay, let's just move on from that.
I want to say, Darcy, that I really appreciate, as a music journalist for a long time now, I really appreciate the fact that you can talk about disliking an artist and actually articulate why, because most people you will find say, well, I hate that band. Well, why? They just stink. And that's the end of the, right. They can't articulate it. So that's really fascinating to hear, for sure. We had a question that I think you've already answered, and that was, we were talking about, is smooth jazz jazz? One of the questions we had was, is swing jazz? And obviously you had mentioned it before as one of the genres. So I don't know if we need to skip that or if you want to elaborate on swings like Resurgence and its connections to rock and roll, because clearly Bill Haley in the comics are kind of a swing band with extra energy, I guess.
Right. Well, Bill Haley was I think a jazz guitarist before he was influenced, all influenced. Yeah. I mean, even Kenny G is influenced. Bill Haley is influenced. They were all influenced by the music, and those, they were crossing borders all the time. The jazz guys were influenced by blues. The pop guys were influenced by, Earth, Wind & Fire was influenced by what Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter were doing in the 60s. Their approach to harmony was acknowledged by the pop guys, by Prince. The evolution has moved together. Nobody's had their head in the sand.
So I almost...
Except one guy.
Who shall not be named?
Who shall not be named.
Yes.
I hate to ask this one because this is one of those questions, and I'm sure you knew this question was coming, so I'm sure you thought about it, or maybe you already had an answer. Who is the most influential jazz musician of all time, in your opinion?
In my opinion, if I had to pick one, I would pick Miles Davis. And I would say because his career spanned so many periods of the music, and he was always at the top of his game with each one of them. So my wife is a saxophone player as well, so she's not a jazz fan, she's a Miles fan. And so for Miles, you can, if you listen to Miles, you're going to get everything. You're pretty much going to get it right back from the beginning of bebop through to hard bop, post bop, and then fusion. The level of his creativity and genius is astounding. So I would.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say that Miles would be my choice in that because of a long spanning career.
And we had asked you also to think about a list. If you had, say, what 10 jazz albums do you have to have in your collection? What would that be? And obviously Miles is going to be on it, but I'm curious to see which albums you would pick.
Okay, well, this would be from my experience, and I have a friend, a dear friend of mine who didn't know anything about jazz. So every Christmas I bought him a jazz album.
Okay.
And so you buy records, or you recommend records that will open doors, not close doors. So the first one I bought him was Miles Davis' Kind of Blue. That's not one of my desert island picks because I can lie on a beach, close my eyes, and hear the whole thing in my head. You know, I know that one. You know, I'm not going to say I don't need to hear it again because I will listen to it. I have it on vinyl in the living room. I have a couple of CDs here. I listen to it all the time. It's just brilliant. But Kind of Blue, and the interesting thing about Kind of Blue is, I think in the 70s or something, they built a bunker like in Arizona in case of nuclear attack. They built a bunker, cement bunker, and they put all these artifacts of human culture in there. And they put Kind of Blue in to represent jazz. I was thinking, I hope they also tossed a turntable in, you know, but that was the one that they chose. And they chose that because it had Bill Evans, this incredibly lyrical piano player that changed the way piano was played. It had Cannonball Adderley, this alto player who came up to New York from Florida, who changed the way that was played. Coltrane playing, you know, when he's just starting to change the way he's playing his time, and just incredible, almost you know, impressionistic influence, you know, by the French impressionist composers, and of course Miles himself. And they're all these three horn players are completely different personalities. You know, Miles is the coolest guy with the sunglasses, and Train is the super serious guy, and Cannon bops him with the blues, going, "Hey, how you doing? Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good too." You know, he's just like got this uplifting, this beautiful spirit to him. So that is a record that you can get, and you can be exposed to. First of all, a fantastic record, even though Miles felt that it was not the artistic. He didn't achieve what he'd wanted to achieve, but he achieved something. There's books written on this record, you know. There's a great book written on the making of Kind of Blue, which talks about the whole culture around it and what led to it, the recording sessions, everything. Ashley Kahn is the author of that. But a great record. And then it leads you to hear Cannon. And I love Cannon's record, so he would be on my top 10 list. Cannon, either with Nancy Wilson, or he did one with Sergio Mendes, which was one of the first records I heard that I wore out. I don't have it anymore. I tried to find it today, but I must have loaned it. But I have a few copies of the CD. Coltrane, obviously. Blue Train, the fantastic record, 1957, I believe. He was that was his first record on, well, only record on Blue Note, just about an incredible recording. The Ballads record is the second one I gave my friend the following Christmas, Coltrane Ballads. Bill Evans, Waltz for Debbie, or Sunday at the Vanguard would be another great one. Charlie Parker, you have to have Charlie Parker with strings would be a beautiful record to have. He plays so lyrically and so beautifully. He was completely intimidated by working with classical musicians. Mitch Miller from Sing Along with Mitch played oboe and English horn on it. And not at the beginning, but Charlie Parker said, I'm not going in there with all those classical musicians. You got to come in here with me. So they wrote oboe into it so that Mitch would be there and could sit beside him. Anything by Duke Ellington, and Billy Strayhorn as composition Lush Life, Ellington stuff is outrageous. I'm a big fan of Thad Jones. That's another story. The Third Christmas, I brought my friend Thelonious Monk, Alone in San Francisco, which is just Monk playing by himself, and it's a fantastic record. Yeah, he's just such a unique voice, and I just love it. I'm a big fan of Hammond organ, so Jimmy Smith, I like to put on at parties. Open House is one of my favorites. It just sounds like you're going to have some ribs and beer and have a really good time. One of the classic ones is Back at the Chicken Shack. That's a classic one with Stanley Turrentine, who's a saxophone player who I bought a record from her, second one. Stan Getz and Gilberto, Girl from Ipanema, classic recording, great melodic recording. Obviously the tune much maligned by this stage, but still an incredible composition. And my favorite one really is Getz with Bob Brookmeyer, recorded in 1961. I have a real soft spot for that. And Focus. Sonny Rollins, saxophone player, The Bridge, Way Out West. Oscar Peterson, Night Train. This one, Chick Corea, Light as a Feather. This one turned my head around. The way these guys were playing, Joe Farrell's flute playing, fantastic. Count Basie, April in Paris, or Sinatra at the Sands with Count Basie, fantastic records. Anything by Keith Jarrett, Roland Kirk, Rosanne Roland Kirk, the flute saxophone player. And if you want somebody who's got a quirky, great sense of humor, he's fun to listen to. And then there's the vocalist era, Ella Sarah Vaughan, Billie Holiday, Joe Williams, aforementioned Frank, and then guitarists like Jim Hall, Joe Pass, and Ed Bickert, who continues to blow my mind every time I listen to his recordings.
Well, I think
I knew you'd have trouble narrowing it down to like 10. I knew
Not
that would be an
possible.
issue.
No, 10, you think, yeah, but I could do 10, but then you're not doing, again, as I said earlier, it's about people and personality. In the jazz world, you're talking to the guys there, they can tell you, they can listen to a record and tell you who the bass player is or the drummer is, because it's all about how the ingredients of the personalities come together to create a record. One interesting thing that a friend of mine, my teacher Lee Konos, once said to me, he said, you know why there's so very few really fantastic jazz records out there? It's because they have to be 4 or 5 musicians who are virtuosos on their instrument, absolutely excellent composers, and they all have to be having a great day. And but those records exist, absolutely. Miles had a bunch of them, and they're out there. But when it comes down to it, I realize that the ones that the 10 or 20, whatever it is that I listed there, they're all mostly the legends. They're the original ones. There's still people making music, but great music. But for me, you go back to the roots of the music, and nobody's really surpassed any of them, to the same degree. And there are people that are excellent still, nonetheless.
I think we'll have to put together a playlist with these suggestions, because I think people will be writing down. So we'll include a playlist with a webinar. So Darcy, you're in an elevator and someone says to you, what's interesting about jazz music? What's your 30-second elevator pitch to that person?
What's interesting are the people and the personalities that play the music. That's what's interesting to me, the way Ella sings a melody different than Sarah Vaughan sings it, or the way Billie Holiday phrases a melody. Now we're talking about true art forms. I've got a recording of Billie singing God Bless the Child, and I'm not sure what the social concept was behind, but it sounds like they're, with the Birmingham Glee Club and chorus. It's like it's a very lame, no offense to Birmingham, but it's just not it's a very poor recording. Maybe they were trying to find a different market for her, but she sings this melody. I get goosebumps because I forgot Louis Armstrong talking about goosebumps. But anyway, it's the personalities, the way Louis sings Bessie Was My Woman Now from Porgy and Bess with Ella Fitzgerald. To this day, I get goosebumps every time I hear it. I don't know if I have an elevator pitch or not. I think it's personal choices. You put something on and it touches you or it doesn't. And then you discover something touched you, and then you get curious, and then you pursue that. Those personalities, as I said, that Miles Davis is about personality. And then you find out you're checking out Cannonball Adderley, you're checking out Coltrane, or you want to find out what other records Philly Joe Jones played on, or what, it becomes very, very much about the people. And I think that's what I'm most attracted to is how, and you can't fake that. Well, yeah, you can't. You are going to play who you are. Mm-hmm. And if it's in the music, it's in the person. And that's what makes it most interesting to me. You really hear personalities come out.
So you're stranded on a desert island and you can only have 3 jazz albums to listen to. What would they be?
Oh, let's see. I'm not sure I can do this. I'm going to try though. Okay. This one for sure. My Funny Valentine. This is just so magnificent. This is conversation. This is 5 musicians talking to each other while they're playing. It elevated my composition teacher at Mac, Hugh Hartwell, introduced me to this record. And my life was forever changed from that moment. Just how these guys played together. Ron Carter, Tony Williams, Herbie Hancock, George Coleman, Miles Davis, a live concert in the Lincoln Center in 1964. I think Tony Williams is 18 or 19 years old. And the fluidity that these guys bring to everything is like nothing else on earth. That is one for sure. This guy, who just passed away a few years ago, Mike Brecker, I would be happy to take any one of his solo records, because this is another personality, somebody who extended the John Coltrane legacy, but brought so much new to it. And believe me, everybody has heard him play. There's nobody you couldn't have gone through life without hearing this guy play. If you heard Still Crazy After All These Years with Paul Simon, he's the saxophone soloist on that. There's just so many major things that he did in the pop world, but his jazz playing was at the highest possible level. He's an inspiration to me, because you try as a musician to be as eclectic as possible. That's probably my biggest problem. I'm interested in it all. So, and then a third, would have to be the complete, I don't know. I just bring my entire collection with me.
It might be a very unfair question to ask you to just pick three. So why don't we, as we wrap up, why don't we talk about what's next for you? I mean, you're still a very active performer, composer. What's next in the next few months, or the remainder of 2022 for you?
Well, I've actually been really busy, especially I had 3 gigs this past week, 2 of which were with the band I have that plays more out of the R&B thing with some great guests. And then I had a jazz gig. This coming week, I have another one with my own quintet. But next month, I also write a lot. And I'm working with an artist, Tom Wilson. And we're doing 3 concerts together at the end of May with a small orchestra. And I've worked with Tom with an arts center orchestra in Hamilton. We had a lot more lined up, but COVID happened, and so we're sort of starting from scratch with that again. But I'm really enjoying all of it. I love writing, and then I play with Tom. I play the soprano saxophone with Tom quite a bit on his stuff. And yeah, that's writing, playing, we're doing recording sessions. It's a very interesting life, and you just try. And for me, it all stems out of jazz and what you can do with that knowledge and how you can apply it to other situations.
Excellent. And Jamie, cool. On CFMU, you have some jazz shows, right? So let's do a promo for our campus radio station.
Gosh, well, I'm trying to get Darcy here to possibly join the team and represent a little jazz on the airwaves, but whether or not that can be done remains to be seen. We have a show called Orange Grove, which is Canadian jazz on Thursdays, and we actually don't have a lot of just jazz shows, like solely jazz programming, but we always hear good jazz on Breakfast of Champions, which is Thursdays 10 a.m. with host Paul Panchasik, well-known local drummer, percussionist, great guy. And you can hear some great early stuff on Swear to Tell the Truth with CM Compton as the host. That's on Tuesday mornings at 10. And then, of course, we're pretty eclectic, so you'll hear it smattering around right next to a Slayer tune. Like, there's death metal, jazz. There's some hosts who I'm one of them. It's like, I feel like this now. So you'll hear it all over the place, but those are the major ones.
Yeah.
And you can stream them all, right, Jamie?
And they can all be streamed from cfmu.ca.
Yeah. So the campus radio station that's everywhere now.
Exactly.
Well, I want to thank both you and Darcy for joining me for a conversation about jazz. I've learned a ton. I unfortunately didn't write down all the lists, but I might follow up with Darcy, because I do think we're going to have to put a playlist for people so that they have that and the recommendations. So it's been a real interesting conversation, from Kenny G to Miles Davis to Ella to all the greats, Charlie Parker. So it's been really great, and I hope people have had a sense of what is jazz and why we all should be listening to jazz today on International Jazz Day, which is April the 30th every year. So thank you.
Our pleasure. My pleasure.
Karen.